This is a Rush Machinery air bearing or air spindle, and it is used primarily for sharpening helical end mills, although it is also set up to sharpen reamers and also the ends of end mills. When I got that spindle, it didn't come with a case, so I'm going to make one. This is an example of a case that is protecting a tool post grinder. This is for the lathe, and you can see it's real heavy metal. It's got a nice handle on the top, it's got these nice latches, and it does a great job of protecting this unit. Everything is held in there securely. This is cradled, and when it's closed, it even clamps on the top and keeps it nice and snug. I want to make something like that, but for the air spindle. I have a bit more wood on hand than I really need. I'm making another dovetailed bookshelf. I have a video on how I do that. I'll chuck a link in the description if you're interested in that. But because a shelf needs perfectly straight, clear, in this case, white ash, I'm gonna have a lot of cutoffs. And something that's nice about having a smaller project alongside a bigger project is I can utilize those cutoffs and I don't have to store them or, worse, chuck them in the wood burner. At this point, I was so ready to be inside. I just spent 2 hours outside in the cold picking apart the lumber pile. Now what's great is I ended up with about twice as much wood as I actually needed, which is great because I got to pick through it and do some grain matching for the shelf. And that also means that the box material will also be grain matched. Not going to go into grain matching, it's a little bit beyond the scope of this video, but it just means that it ends up looking prettier. All the extra lumber was then put on the indoor lumber rack. I'm going to go draw up some plans and then start breaking this down. There is a toolbox in here. These are 4/4. So I'm going to have to make those a lot thinner. Just went through and got everything organized. Did a little bit of grain matching. And yeah, let's get ready for glue up. Because I'm extra fancy, I'm cutting a staggered glue joint at the router table and then bringing it over to glue up on the work table. This glue joint is really cool and I love using it on panel glue ups. It ensures that the panels are nice and flat and it makes alignment so much easier. Also, there's very little fuss when it comes to glue. Just put the glue bead in the little groove and clamp it together. A little bit of squeeze out, absolutely perfect every time. A few pipe clamps allow me to get it nice and tight. And then I'll add 2 parallel clamps to the top just to make sure I have even pressure all across the boards. For no reason whatsoever, I planed these boards down to a final thickness of 600 thou. Then, the ends were cleaned up in preparation for joinery. This is called a box joint. I'm at the router table right now. This is a 1/2 inch 3-flute carbide router bit. It's made by Whiteside. And this is the Incra iBox box joint jig. I struggled for about an hour to set this up before I finally opened the manual. And then it took me about 2 minutes. So if you're going to do this, pull out that manual and just do what it says. But the short version is, there are 2 knobs on the end. What you want to do is adjust both of them so these are tight together and that it's just touching the edge of the bit. Not enough that you'll turn the bit if you go past it, but just enough so you can hear it scrape. So then that is set. Next, you turn the red knob until this opening right here, till it's at about 1/2 inch. Then you do a test cut, and then you turn the red knob to dial it in. If your joint is kind of loose, you go righty-tighty. If it's tight, you go lefty-loosey on the knob. And it is very easy. I way overcomplicated it by not reading the manual. So read the manual, make your life a lot easier. It's really important for the best results to use a clamp on every cut. This makes sure that the board does not move at all and that groove is exactly the width of the bit. Examining the joint, we can see that it is really nicely spaced. It is tight, so it will hold it, but it's not so tight that I can't get it together. I will be using a fairly slippery glue to aid in assembly. The bottom of the case needs to hold close to 70 pounds. I want it to be very strong. In order to achieve that, I'm routing a 1/2 inch groove along one edge of these panels. In that groove, there will be a captured panel. Because I don't want that groove to be visible from the outside of the case, I had to route it as a stopped dado. Now I'm cleaning it up with a chisel that will allow it to fit that panel nice and snug. Here I'm protecting my ears while using safety squints to trim this panel to width. Since this panel is 600 thou thick and the groove is only 500 thou, I'm relieving the edge. It's been a few days since I last worked on this project. This panel actually warped a little bit, so I'm straightening it with some clamps before finishing my relief cut. This is a bit over the top for a toolbox, but I want to sand and pre-finish the bottom panel. That way, if it expands or contracts with seasonal movement, I'm not going to see any lines where the finish didn't completely coat the panel. Of course, that will be the underside of the box. I don't know why I would be looking at the underside of the box, but it makes me feel better. A cool trick with box joints is that you can partially set up the box. When it's in its final shape, then some glue can be put on each one of the fingers before clamping it all together. It's much easier this way than trying to put glue on all the fingers and then assemble 4 separate, well in this case 5 separate pieces. The glue that I'm using is polyurethane glue. It's made by Gorilla Glue. This glue is very slippery, which will aid in tight fitting joinery. It also sands really nice, so it's easy to clean up afterwards. It's one of my favorite glues when it comes to fine joinery. That cleaned up really nicely. There is just nothing quite like a nice fitted box joint. Looks good. I got that nice and trimmed. This top board is just slightly oversized. You'll see why later. Now I'm going to glue it on, and the reason for gluing it on right now is because when I make a cut to separate the top from the bottom, wood could shift a little bit, and then it might not line up perfectly. So by gluing the top on right now, I'm going to lock everything in place. The bottom will be locked, the top will be locked, and when I separate them, they'll match up perfectly. Now this air spindle has this little indexing pin right here, and it's meant to go on and off pretty quickly. So you can see it just kind of pops right in there, tighten a little screw, and that's good to go. So I think we'll pop that off because that allows me to cut off about 3 inches off the height of this box. Same with this right here. This just unthreads pretty quickly. And again, I can make this box quite a bit smaller. I think what I'll do is make a little MDF cutout in the bottom for all the tools so they have a nice place to sit. I'll probably use this mat underneath there. It's nice and grippy, and I really like the way this is looking. It's not too terribly unbalanced either. The center right now is right about here. If I put a handle in the middle, it's not going to be so terribly balanced that I can't lift it up. Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, it looks good. All sharp edges are eased with a 1/16 inch roundover bit, followed by a final sanding to 320 grit, and finally some hand sanding just to get everything fine-tuned. To pop the grain and give it extra clarity, I use compressed air to blow all the dust off before applying Birchwood KC True Oil. After drying overnight, I like to come back and apply 2 coats of Rattle Can semi-gloss polyurethane. All right, so originally this false floor was too snug, so I trimmed this side, which was a mistake because that shrunk my clearance, which was pretty tight for the base. I had to trim the other side so I could slide it over, and now I have a gap. And this floor kind of moves around a little bit. I could put a shim there to lock it in place. I could also redo the entire floor, but I don't feel like doing that. So that's why I have this shim. And there we go. That locks it all together. Very nice. Looking at the lid, there's one last thing I'm not quite happy with. This panel is simply glued to these edges, and that should be fine. An edge glue up like on these long edges is very, very strong. But the ends, these could pucker and pop off here, and that could cascade to a failure around the entire thing. Now the bottom is recessed or dadoed in all the way around. That will never, ever fail. But what I can do is reinforce this edge right here. That way, in case the glue fails, the top will never pop off and will never drop the box by holding on to the handle. Overall, I'm very happy with how this turned out. I now have a nice, sturdy case for this air bearing, and I can be confident that when it's not in use, it will be well protected and safe from shop hazards.